So there's been a lot of interest in MicroStrategy and what's going on with the stock lately. There have been posts on Reddit, Wall Street Bets, that people are going way in on MicroStrategy, and the stock has had an unprecedented upward rip. We also have Peter Schiff weighing in on it. Lucas, you've been looking at this, and you're making a prediction here that this is going to go differently than some people may expect. I'm curious to hear your thoughts as to where you think this whole MicroStrategy saga is gonna end up.
Well, I can't talk about MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor whenever you mention Peter Schiff without starting there. Can't believe you brought up Peter Schiff. And I haven't even been following what he says, but it'd be interesting to turn his feedback on as Bitcoin gains in prominence. There's you sent me a clip yesterday of Michael Saylor talking about his strategy with MicroStrategy and what he plans to do with Bitcoin. He has a massive amount of Bitcoin, and he was talking about the options. And there's Peter Schiff. The options that.
Oh yeah, because this is the quote from Peter Schiff that I thought was super interesting, because he's talking about a flywheel that's happening. So MicroStrategy is out there raising money, and they're raising money so that they can buy Bitcoin. And yes, the clip actually talks a little bit about this, because people have been complaining. They said, well, why is the price of MicroStrategy so high? It doesn't make sense, because they're thinking about MicroStrategy as if it were an ETF. So they say the only value of MicroStrategy is the underlying asset. And in the video clip that I guess we should play it, he's actually asserting something different, is that it's not just the underlying asset. It's not just the Bitcoin. So MicroStrategy is not an ETF. It's not just a proxy for buying Bitcoin, but it's something else. And he talks about the leverage that MicroStrategy is bringing into the world of Bitcoin, essentially. So buying MicroStrategy, he says and asserts, is like buying leveraged Bitcoin. And they're doing a bunch of other stuff, which I would say is kind of like a reverse stable coin.
I think thinking about it as a reverse stablecoin is a good way to look at it, and possibly the thing that I worry about, and I think pulling up that clip would be great to listen to what
I got it ready to go whenever.
You know what? Go ahead and play it before I run my mouth about the possibilities or what I think is actually going to happen. So I'm ready if you are.
There's a perception that your stock trades at a premium to the intrinsic value of Bitcoin that you hold in the core business. Is that your view? And if so, what explains it? Is that the Saylor premium?
No, that's only a perception of people that haven't been paying attention or don't really do any research. If you actually logged into our earnings call, or if anybody studied the company, that's kind of like saying there's a perception that Microsoft trades at a premium to its underlying assets. Well, yeah, it does. It trades 50 times greater than its net tangible assets. So does Apple, so does Standard Oil, so does every operating company. So the myth, right, the misunderstanding here is people don't understand what our operating business is. Our operating business is a treasury operation that's securitizing Bitcoin. And the primary use that we offer to the marketplace is we offer high volatility, high leverage equity, like 2x Bitcoin in the equity, or 1.5x Bitcoin. And that's very valuable. If you're an options trader or you're an investor, you would rather have 1.5x or 2x leverage on the equity. And the way that we create that in a systemic fashion is we strip the risk, the performance, and the volatility off of Bitcoin, and we sell fixed income instruments to the fixed income market that can't buy Bitcoin and doesn't want the equity and doesn't want the volatility. So when we sell a convertible bond, at a premium. We might sell $1 billion bond and we would probably capture 750 million or more in the arbitrage on the day we do the deal. And then if we hold the bond 6 years and Bitcoin goes up 21% a year, we make $3 billion on the back end. So we generate $3.7 billion of shareholder gains by arbitraging the duration on cheap capital with the return on a crypto commodity. And the people that bought the bond can't buy Bitcoin. They're convertible arbitragers.
Okay, that's enough of that. He keeps going, but he essentially just starts repeating himself and maybe providing a little bit of clarity. But that's it in a nutshell right there. So MicroStrategy can be thought of as leveraged Bitcoin. What they're doing is they're providing these fixed asset annuities or equities that have been very traditional. This is something that people who are retired want a fixed income, want a reliable, source. It has traditionally been filled by annuities or money market funds, or there's just a variety of different products that have been doing this kind of thing. So essentially what Michael Saylor is saying here is this is what he's providing to the marketplace. And that's why MicroStrategy has a value that is over the underlying assets, because they're doing these financial instruments and what have you. So the way that I'm saying it's like a reverse stablecoin is because they're providing essentially a money market account for people that want such a thing. And the way that they're doing it is they're backing it with Bitcoin. And that's the underlying plan strategy. And it looks a lot like the same way that you create Tether or any other stable coin. Is you have an asset that backs it, which is in the stable coin world, it's usually US treasuries. But Michael Saylor is saying, I would never touch treasuries. This all should be Bitcoin, because I'm going to make a way better return, and I'm going to be in a way better position because Bitcoin is the one true asset.
Well, interesting that you mentioned Tether, but we'll get into that later. So the thing that
I mentioned Tether because I'm saying it's like a reverse stable coin, or it's like it's like a different kind of a stable coin. You're creating a stable coin, or you're creating a stable value, which is ostensibly offsetting inflation or whatever. So it's a play to hold stable amounts of US dollars over the long term for people that need wealth preservation in that fashion. So just like keep afloat and not impact their buying power.
Well, I'll just go to Tether right now, because I think the distinctions between Tether and MicroStrategy are very important to consider. Tether is buying United States treasuries to back up their stablecoin, and they're also based out of Hong Kong. And those are, their location is no accident. You might ask, why aren't they in the United States? Why does the United States sell its treasuries to sovereign countries around the world? Those are both great things to consider here, because part of the problem that I'm afraid MicroStrategy is going to run into the future is to discover that if they're not part of the state economy, the fiat system, from where they're located, it is going to be hard for them to make the case for the benefit that they're bringing to the government. And when we say incorporated, there's these libertarian and conservative and Republican notions about the private sector, but the private sector is the sector that is selected by the government to provide, excitement, the notion of opportunity. We talk about the private sector provides options and better efficiency than the government can provide, but we should not forget that the private sector is granted by the authority of the government. And when we talk about incorporating, we're talking about an incorporation into, mostly into the tax code, but basically the government opening up an area for a company to operate. And when we think about companies that are creating financial instruments in the world today. One, we did used to have investment banks that were different than commercial and retail banks, and we used to draw lines between them. Yes, we've erased some of those lines between them, but those companies that were behind that had a lot of influence with the government. And maybe, maybe the United States or the federal government having a strategic Bitcoin reserve will give MicroStrategy some sort of inroad into decision making or protection against the government. But if they're operating in a currency that the government has no control over, then I don't understand why the government would allow a company that's not providing some sort of actual benefit, that is just giving the citizens of a country the ability to opt out of the taxing scheme and the control of that government. That's at what part of that is a sale to the government for which MicroStrategy must operate from under, whether it be the United States or any other government in the world.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you bring up, because I think what you're asserting, and this a little bit harkens to the conversation we had yesterday, is that the U.S. government has no interest in letting people do this, and doesn't want to be involved in this thing for which they don't have control. I'm not sure I fully agree with that. I think that, Bitcoin being something that's outside the control of governments, and certain governments piling into it, and saying, hey, we're gonna have a significant play in this because this is the Bancor. That to me, I almost feel like Bitcoin as the Bancor makes sense. And if this was the pact that the world wanted to do, but sort of got sidetracked into the US dollar for some period of time, why isn't this just the arrangement that, essentially Bretton Woods was trying to set up back in those days? I mean, isn't that what we're doing, is just transitioning to the thing that they originally wanted to do, but like suddenly got sidetracked into this US dollar for some period of time?
Great question, and I agree. But it's one thing for companies to hold Bitcoin, and to trade or settle payments, or establish a baseline of value between companies, and also nation states to do so. But it's another thing for a company to be using that as a basis for financial products, to be turning around and turning around to a retail market. And that's where I'm afraid they're going to get in trouble, because I also look at that and say, what happens, like right now, Bitcoin's going up. What happens in the future when it begins to stabilize or possibly to go down? What would stop a firm or a group of people from making a decision to begin to manipulate the market? And I don't mean to to disparage their honor or morals, but I'm coming from history. The United States government certainly does it. The first thing that I thought of when I listened to this clip was FDR, and the abuse that he wrought on the American economy in the wake of the Great Depression. We kind of gloss over what happened then, but FDR, after seizing all of the gold from the hands of Americans and American companies, then turned around and tried to sell the gold back at rates that he would select, because he wanted to influence or to have an effect on the prices of especially American agricultural products and American commerce. And it didn't go so well for him, but who it did go well for was the banking and finance industry. And I think that whenever we look at problems that, roaring kitty, or large problems that we see in the stock market today, we understand that there is there's a high probability that the prices of many stocks are manipulated, and they're manipulated by selling large numbers at a time and buying back in the future. And so if a company doesn't have the control of the price of something, options sounds great. But if they are given any amount of control over the price of that, then that becomes a dangerous trap for them in the future.
So what you're asserting here is because MicroStrategy is trading in Bitcoin, it can manipulate the price, and therefore this flywheel thing, even that they're doing, where they're acquiring dollars, using that to acquire Bitcoin, and then creating stock value, because the stock value is very closely tied to the price of Bitcoin, that even that flywheel is market manipulation, and that's why you're saying here's what could potentially happen when the regulators get in there and start looking at what's going on here.
Yeah, I think that is I think we know what human nature is, and we know what the incentives are, and that's what would happen at some point.
Well, it's an interesting thought. I don't fully understand all the ins and outs of the law, but starting to look through some of Trump's cabinet, and maybe this is a good time to turn to this, because we've been looking at the cabinet. We did an entire episode where we looked through a lot of who's getting picked, and there's some rumblings going on in the political world, but at least this one that I've got on the screen, we've got the CEO of Cantor, Fitzgerald, Howard Lutnick, who's going to be in as Secretary of Commerce. There's definitely quite a few cabinet picks that are very pro Bitcoin. They're very, they're very supportive of the idea. We're talking about creating strategic reserves. We've got Cantor Fitzgerald, who famously came out months ago as pro Bitcoin. So they're sort of stacking the deck in this way. I'm curious if are we really going to have an administration that's going to be interested in going after Michael Saylor for market manipulation on Bitcoin, when this is a very pro Bitcoin administration? Like it seems like it wouldn't be the kind of thing this administration would be interested in doing.
Well, you're right about that, but I'm thinking about in the future. Republicans are not going to be in power forever. Even if Republicans are, their views, especially as the government is strapped for cash, or things change in the future, that's not going to be the same. Great. I can't believe you brought up Howard Lutnick, because and not only that, a post that says it outright. Cantor Fitzgerald is custodies Tether's treasuries, and so to me having for Tether, or for Tether's playing the game maybe a little bit better in buying treasuries, not just Bitcoin, because it gives them a tie into the current financial system. And I love the check that Bitcoin places on currencies of the world, state currencies of the world. But for a company to be placing all of their eggs in a Bitcoin basket is, to me, dangerous for them, because it doesn't give them it doesn't give the government control over them. It doesn't build any bridges between them. But going to the cabinet, I think that it looks like the members of the Senate of Congress, in reaction in part to the Democrats' negative assessment of crypto, and let's not forget FTX and the associations between FTX. It's not as if the government already wasn't looking at crypto to solve solutions or to be an innovation in the future with FTX, but then that blew up in their face, and so they had to turn to alternatives. I do think that we're going to see a federal strategic Bitcoin reserve. I don't know. I don't understand why that makes any sense. I think that states having a strategic Bitcoin reserve makes a heck of a lot more sense. But I've also been very interested in the non-traditional appointments that Trump is making, and we talked about that. We talked about that when we talked about his cabinet selections, but I think the much more interesting thing that we're going to see is how Trump puts those candidates in office.
Yeah, there's some really sophisticated stuff that is potentially brewing with how the appointments could actually be done. And I remembered seeing just this little piece of information that I didn't really understand it when I first looked at it, but it was where we had Mitch McConnell say there will be no recess appointments. Help us understand that. What's he talking about? What is this recess appointments business?
Well, this drew from me a great cackle, also a strong mea culpa, because I said that Mike Johnson was out. We're going to see Jim Jordan as the new Speaker of the House, but then if you've been paying attention to Trump lately, the UFC fight, the McDonald's mill on the Trump jet. Who has been there but Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House?
Hanging around like a goblin in the background in some fashion.
Well, and we should also bring into consideration for Mike Johnson that maybe he was facing a stacked deck and doing the best that he could in under the Biden administration.
Well,
And
he was such a horrible pick for speaker. I don't even understand how he ever got in. I remember when that fight first shaped up when they ousted the previous Speaker of the House because they said he was a neo or he was a rhino and a neocon, and they didn't want him in there. And I think it was Matt Gaetz that led that charge, right? It was him and
it was
Marjorie Taylor Greene, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And so and Matt Gaetz, Matt Gaetz has taken a lot of heat for various things. I think that is a measure of the fear of the effectiveness that and the resolve that he has to correct some of the things that have been going on in the Department of Justice. Department of Justice doesn't come around till 1870, and I thought I put up my most brilliant post on X the other day that said, we're living in a project in which the airdrop was in 1862, the utility was added in 1863 and 1864, and the Discord mod was added in 1870. The Discord mod being the Department of Justice. But anyway, I think what we have to consider here is that. Well, the other thing that hadn't occurred when we last talked about Trump's cabinet was the selection of the leader of the majority in the Senate. And there was talk about that being Rick Scott from Florida, where Matt
But he didn't get it.
He did not get it. And there was movement to draw more support from him from the I should say more Republican than populist wings of the Republican Party.
But the election for the leader of the Senate majority leader, that's a secret ballot. Nobody really knows who voted for who.
Yeah, but Mike Lee called all the senators. The Senate operates. I don't know. Are there any secrets? I think the positions of most of the senators were known by their statements and also by their by what they support through their votes and through their voice in the Senate. So I don't know if there was any big secrets there, but what we do know.
This picture, by the way, is why I said hanging out like a goblin in the background. I don't know if you saw this post on X, but like somebody said, "Hey, there's a famous painting that this McDonald's thing is the throwback to." I think it has more to do with if people are sitting around a table and somebody is standing and then somebody wants to snap a photo, this is the natural arrangement of
You
individuals
know
around
this is
the
an
table.
AI generated photo on the left, right?
I know, it's funny though.
Okay, and you know who the attribution was to?
No, I didn't catch that. Who's the attribution to?
That Dutch painter Deitz Nuützen.
Yeah, I thought this was hilarious when I saw it though. I just had to throw it on there.
I thought it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and but let's not get too far off track there. So we anyway we know that the populist movement did not gain control of the Senate, and that puts the confirmation of Trump's cabinet picks in jeopardy. And Mitch McConnell said there will be no recess appointments. Well, Mitch, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the buddy-buddiness that's going on between the Speaker of the House, but the Constitution of the United States says that the president may adjourn both the Senate and the House, both sides of Congress, if they are not in agreement. And so in building up a relationship with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, what we are probably going to see if the Senate does not make these confirmations, and the president gets to select his cabinet, and then listen to the advice and ask for the consent of the Senate, and also what does we've talked about what does the what does the Congress actually do? They're in charge of the purse. And what are the powers of the federal government? They're to send a bill to the Treasury. And so what does the consent of Congress actually means? It means that the cabinet members can get paid. So if Trump adjourns the House and the Senate, and he can do so for whatever amount of time that he wishes. This is according to Article 2, Section 3. Then he can make appointments to his cabinet, and they may serve, I believe, for 2 years, and they just don't get paid. And I think a lot of his appointments don't necessarily need the salary that they might have been getting from Congress.
Well, and it's become apparent that somehow members of Congress and members of the government are somehow getting compensated far disproportionate to the salary that they're making. If you look at Nancy Pelosi or a variety of other people, you say there's no way they could afford or have the net worth they do if they weren't making money in some other fashion other than just getting the money from whatever they're doing within the government itself. So I think you're 100% on point here. And this whole idea of putting Congress into adjournment, it's been likened to the dissolution of Parliament in various different places, because we hear this, right, when we're in France or in Germany, that they're saying, well, we're going to call for a new government, we're going to have new elections, whatever, that essentially, the prime minister or whatever can send the parliament off, and then the people will bring back a new one to try to have some sort of a government formation. But this is not how the US works at all. Like, these are supposed to be independent bodies that have checks and balances. And so this thing that's going on with the Senate is essentially Mitch McConnell trying to step in and say, hey, we're going to throw our weight around. We're not just going to do whatever you want. We're not going to let you do recess appointments. But the situation you're describing is because Trump is so close to the Speaker of the House here, Mike Johnson, that now if there's a disagreement here, the president has the ability to sort of send these people off. Now he can make all of his appointments. He doesn't need Senate confirmation. And I believe that there's a time limit too, because Obama tried to do something like this as well. And the Supreme Court weighed in and said, well, this is a power that's granted to the president, but they have to be, not in session for what, like 3 days or something. There's a standard for how long this has to happen. But after that,
well, that standard is a gentleman's agreement. It's not written into the Constitution.
I thought that the Supreme Court weighed in on it.
Now, I mean, look, go back to Lincoln and all the ex parte decisions, and the fact that the Supreme Court has less power over the executive and the legislative branch than they like you to believe. And this is why the federal court system holds tribunals and not trials. They cannot drag the executive into court. This is also, go back to Trump versus the United States that was decided in July, and they said, well, the executive can pretty much do what he wants, and they were right to do so because what body could the Supreme Court use to coerce the legislature or the executive to do anything? And it's so and again, this is also why I think we should be thinking about the judiciary in terms of juries rather than these federalist kings that have been created.
So the thing that's interesting to me about this is in the first Trump administration, Trump came in, completely did not expect to win. They were all surprised, and there was this mad scramble to try and figure out how they were going to populate the executive, entire apparatus. And the original idea was, hey, we're going to drain the swamp, but then the people they appointed were dubiously, swamp creatures. So here we've got the second administration getting ready to come in. And the thing that strikes me the most between these two different terms in office, from the first time Trump was in office to this time, is the sophistication of the political savviness that's going on here. I mean, this idea that, you would have President Trump cozying up to Mike Johnson so that they could do recess appointments by sending Congress home for some period of time. This is pretty astute. I mean, this is political machinations, right? I mean, would you say that this is one of the big differences between the two administrations?
Oh, 100%. And even when I think about, for what reason would Trump call the legislation back into session? Whoops, Freudian slip. I think a lot of people would make the case that that he's going to have to do so in order to fund the government, but that hasn't actually been high on his list of things to do in light
What
of.
is going on with that? Because we used to have these debt fights, these frequent debt fights that would be where we'd raise the debt ceiling or whatever. But I thought during the last time when we had one of these debt ceiling fights, they actually just punted this thing for all eternity, right? Like we don't even have that anymore, do we? Or is there a
I,
debt ceiling coming up?
I think there is a funding window that's coming up in March. So they kicked it back to after the inauguration. And this was I believe back in August. And the Democrats and the Republicans did not want to have this fight about the rising the 36 trillion debt and the dire straits that the United States is in at this point. And so they wanted to focus on the election. Democrats didn't want to deal with it, and they put it back to after the election to see, settle the election and then go back and have that fight. So I think if we also begin to think about cabinet officials who are saying I'm here because I believe in this cause. I don't care about getting paid. I will work here for 100 days or 2 years. I mean, this narrative about when congressmen or elected officials talk about what they're doing their job, I want to vomit. And I say, it's not a job. You shouldn't be there for the money. You should be there for the power to make laws and also to not make laws if you're not needed. Because whenever you start paying somebody, they say, "Oh, well, I need to clock in at 8 o'clock in the morning and be here year round." There were many years in the United States when Congress did not only met for a short amount of time, and also did not create hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pages of legislation that nobody can read. So, whatever Trump is doing, I think is going to be both unprecedented. There's never been an adjournment that's been called by the President of the United States for the Houses. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that we need to change the trajectory of what's been going on. We have put into the hands of the bureaucracy the things that the legislatures understood they were not allowed to do. That's been hugely problematic. I'm excited about his appointments. Some of them have axes to grind with their departments. Matt Gaetz in Department of Justice, Kash Patel in the FBI. But I think that the reason for being for many of these bureaucracies needs to be called into question. And again, the United States has functioned for.
And this is where some are saying that the U.S. is about to go through a similar cycle to what happened with Javier Milei, right? Where Milei famously stood in front of what was that board, and it was like, Department of this gone, Department of this gone.
Yeah.
So so we're going to see Elon Musk and Vivek have to get a similar meme video shot, because that's what they're planning on doing, right? Is to just like cut large swaths of the government. So yeah, what need do they have to come back for Congress to do an appropriations thing if really what they're going to do is just like slash and burn the entire U.S. government?
Well, and I also think that we need to remember in the in the analogies between Argentina and the United States, that the United States owns a lot of its debt, and also it's denominated in the money that the United States can print. So Argentina is in a very different situation, and I'm still unconvinced as to me what Argentina really needed was somebody who could forgive the debt that is owed by Argentina, and Javier Milei doesn't have that power, and I think we're also going to see. Especially in the last couple of days, as we've seen Biden's actions with regards to approving missiles to be fired into the Ukraine. There were discussions that Trump had with Vladimir Putin. I thought the most interesting discussion that he had in his entire presidency was with regards to Stephen Magnitsky and whether the United States should be giving up its citizens for to stand before international or courts, or for sovereign country Russia's courts. And the United States has shielded its politicians from, especially international courts, even though we talked about international rules-based order. But I'm also going to be very interested into what the Trump administration's responses are with regards to, because Trump is talking with, or it seems that is talking with, or at least he's making public statements about the wars in Ukraine and Israel and Iran.
Well, we've got articles of impeachment that are going to get started for Biden for
those seem, I mean,
long range missiles or whatever, right? But I wanted to make one point about this before we move on to that, because I think we got a couple minutes to quickly cover that subject. But as far as like what they're planning on doing with funding and debt and all of this, I mean, Trump has said some stuff that essentially sounds like he has an idea to rehypothecate US debt and somehow offer up the assets in some fashion to stabilize, to make this currency something people would be interested in again in the age of Bitcoin. And it's some basket of stuff that's going to be associated with the dollar. It seems Bitcoin, rehypothecation of debt, these things are on the table. I wonder if you just briefly react to that idea, because I think there's something that has been floated out there in the whole discussion of the campaign, and even with the people that Trump has been picking for various offices, seem like they're setting up some sort of a situation where they would do something along these lines.
You know, I'm not familiar with this, but we need to me, we need to begin to have conversations about debt forgiveness. The United States, you know, amongst itself, amongst the citizens, we have bankruptcy courts. That's one form of debt forgiveness. But you know, the Democrats' solution of creating more debt to make government programs to pull people up is it has not seemed to work, and the neocon, or like, I don't know, the liberal Republican solution of trusting in private markets has also not worked. And so I think it's time for the progressive. I don't even like to say Republicans anymore, because Trump is really broken from that. You know, look at his support from the likes of Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, Bobby Kennedy, and even, like, think about Trump's no tax on tips, no income tax. These are huge departures from the liberal Republican solutions. So I think it will be I think that we need to be considering other solutions. I'm not that familiar with hypothecation, but when you were describing it, I was thinking about what China is doing with the United States debt that they have, because they are now reloaning it out, and I think we may see more of that in the future, or we may see countries that are just abandoning the dollar altogether. So, good question. I'll think about it, and we'll come back to it in the future.
Okay, so last thing, should we talk about this Biden situation, or is that too big of a topic?
I mean, we can talk about it. I don't think that articles of impeachment are going to go anywhere. They might, but we're too close to Trump's inauguration. We're at the. I mean, you know, 2 hours ago, the Keir Starmer with Great Britain also authorized, or the Ukraine used the Storm Shadow missiles. They have now fired ATACMS that Joe Biden has authorized, with American intelligence, American soldiers, and American soldiers fired from the Ukraine. And Russia said, "Boy, that's a line, and you have crossed it, and we will respond." And rather than backing down, they had that NATO, Keir Starmer, France have doubled and tripled down. Turkey, Italy, Germany, Finland, Sweden. I see a great rift growing in NATO. I don't know how NATO survives this.
And this doesn't line up with Trump's stated desire, which is to try to end this war. This is an escalation of the war.
Absolutely. And an escalation, you know, talking about precedent before, you would think that Biden would have taken his hands off, like taken the path of think of LBJ in the wake of the Vietnam War. He knew that the country was against him. Did he turn around and send a nuclear bomb into Vietnam? No. He laid his head on the desk and said, I messed up. I made a mess that I can't get myself out of. And
well, it sure doesn't seem like Biden's taking that path. It seems like he's now going to go and ram through a whole slew of stuff. Like that seems like what's happening here in the in the last days of the Biden administration.
Well, and he's throwing more and more and more money at Ukraine. I saw 245 billion more to be sent today. Unbelievable. So hopefully the Trump administration will hold him accountable for his actions. And this will also be interesting in the wake of the Trump versus the United States decision. But if the people of the United States cannot hold him accountable, maybe they can also not protect him from international organizations holding him accountable. And that might be the best solution going forward. But it also will call into question the actions of many of our other presidents, Barack Obama, GW, and Bill Clinton. But the United States has been,
and this is one of the reasons why Matt Gaetz, as the head of as the Attorney General, the head of the DOJ, this is causing some amount of concern, right?
I don't think it should cause that much concern. I think the Department of Justice is more concerned. The Department of Justice, again, doesn't come to us until 1870, and also grows out of the Attorney General. Before there was a Department of Justice, was legal counsel to the president. The president used to. Even in our lifetime, there was a time when the president recommended legislation to Congress, and when it was supposed to be in some capacity a voice, someone to go out and convey to the representatives from the various states what American citizens and what was good for America as a union, and in doing so needed legal counsel. So this notion that the federal government was ever supposed to have any authority over the bodies of Americans comes to us in the wake of the Civil War, and I think is very problematic. And so I think that dissolving the FBI and the DOJ, or at the very least restructuring the federal judiciary, and the judiciary comes to us from the president of the Senate, Oliver Ellsworth, who also was one of the two creators of the bicameral Congress idea in the drafting of the Constitution with Roger Sherman. He created the Senate. He was the president of the Senate, and he wrote the Judiciary Act of 1789. Maybe we need to rethink that. If we do need investigative and enforcement mechanisms in the federal judiciary, then maybe they should be answering to those judges. And maybe we need federal juries, so the judges could be overseeing the likes of the DOJ, etc. And we get rid of these federalist kingmakers. So I think all of those could happen in the future and might be better for our system of government. So, but things have come to a head. Many unprecedented actions call for unprecedented solutions, and I think Trump is just the man to do it. So, I'm on the edge of my seat, and we'll keep an eye on everything. Hopefully.
Interesting day. We'll definitely keep our eye on it, and we'll talk to you tomorrow on FOMO.